There's a corporation in history that did something no company has done since. It conquered a country, not through lobbying, not through market dominance, through military force. The East India Company, founded in 1600 as a trading company. By 1803, it ruled most of India, with its own army of 260,000 soldiers, twice the size of the British military, its own currency, its own courts, its own laws. A corporation accountable only to shareholders. And those shareholders became the wealthiest people in Britain, not from selling products, from conquering territories, from taxing 200 million people, from controlling an entire subcontinent's economy. At its peak, the East India Company controlled more land than the British Empire itself. And when it finally collapsed in 1857, the British government had to bail it out. The first too-big-to-fail bailout in history, not for a bank, for a company that had become an empire. But here's what they don't teach you in business school. The East India Company wasn't an anomaly. It was a blueprint for how corporations grow beyond their original purpose, how economic power becomes political power, how companies become more powerful than governments, and how too big to fail becomes inevitable. This is the story of how one company conquered India, and why the same five-stage pattern is forming again with Amazon, Google, and BlackRock. If you think corporations can't become empires, the East India Company did exactly that. For 257 years, every corporate empire begins the same way, with a government giving one company exclusive control over an entire market. On December 31st, 1600, Queen Elizabeth I signed a royal charter. The charter created the East India Company and gave it a monopoly on all English trade with Asia. Not preferential treatment, a monopoly. By law, no other English company could trade with India, Southeast Asia, or the East Indies. If you wanted Asian spices, textiles, or tea in England, you bought from the East India Company, or you smuggled. This wasn't capitalism. This was government-granted monopoly power. But the charter gave the company something more dangerous than trade rights: the right to acquire territory, the right to build forts, the right to raise armies, the right to make war and peace, the right to coin money, the right to administer justice. A corporation with the powers of a sovereign nation. By 1690, the company had established fortified trading posts across India. Bombay, Madras, Calcutta. These weren't offices. They were fortified settlements with walls, cannons, and soldiers, because trade in the 1600s required force. Pirates attacked ships. Local rulers demanded bribes. Rival companies fought for the same markets. So the East India Company built an army, not to conquer, they said, just to protect trade. This is stage one, the monopoly grant. When a government gives one corporation exclusive control and eliminates competition by law. The company didn't earn its monopoly through better products. It was given monopoly power by the crown, and that power allowed it to do things no competitive company could do: build forts, raise armies, make treaties. Because when you don't have to compete, you can focus on control. Stage two is when the corporation realizes something dangerous. That military force is cheaper than negotiation. That violence secures better deals than diplomacy. By 1750, the East India Company's army had grown to 20,000 soldiers, mostly Indian sepoys, local soldiers employed by the company, led by British officers, equipped with European weapons, loyal not to India but to the company, because the company paid them. And the company didn't just defend trading posts. It started intervening in local politics. When a regional ruler was hostile to company trade, the company backed his rival with money, weapons, and soldiers. When that rival won, he granted the company favorable terms, tax exemptions, exclusive contracts, territorial concessions. This is how trade became conquest, not through direct invasion, through backing winners in local conflicts and demanding payment in exchange for economic control. In 1757, everything changed. The Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, demanded that the company stop fortifying Calcutta. The company refused. The Nawab attacked. On June 23, 1757, at the Battle of Plassey, 3,000 company soldiers defeated the Nawab's 50,000-man army, not through superior tactics, through bribery, The company had secretly paid the Nawab's generals to betray him. When the battle started, half the Nawab's army didn't fight. The Nawab was captured and executed. The company installed a puppet ruler, Mir Jafar, who granted the company control over Bengal's tax revenues, not trade rights, tax revenues. The company was now collecting taxes from 30 million people. This is stage 2, the private army, when a corporation builds a military force and uses it not for defense, but for conquest. The East India Company crossed a line in 1757 from trader to ruler, and there was no going back. Stage 3 is when economic control becomes political control. When the corporation stops negotiating with governments and becomes the government. After the Battle of Plassey in 1757, the East India Company controlled Bengal, the richest province in India, and it started extracting wealth, not through trade, through taxation. The company collected land taxes, trade taxes, and customs duties, and sent the money to Britain, not to the British government, to company shareholders. By 1765, the company had formal authority from the Mughal emperor to collect taxes across Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. This made the company the de facto ruler of 30 million people. But the company had no interest in governing. It wanted profit. So it collected taxes but didn't invest in infrastructure, didn't maintain irrigation systems, didn't store grain for famines. It just extracted. By the 1770s, the company controlled most of eastern India. By the 1800s, most of the subcontinent, through military conquest, treaty manipulation, and debt traps. If a local ruler couldn't pay his debts to the company seized his territory. If a ruler died without a direct heir, the company annexed his kingdom. If a region refused the company's trade terms, the company invaded. By 1803, the company's army had grown to 260,000 soldiers, larger than the British Army, a corporation with 250,000 soldiers ruling hundreds of millions of people. And the British government didn't control the company. The company controlled British policy because the company's shareholders included members of parliament, aristocrats, and the king's advisors. The people making laws about India were the people profiting from company rule. This is stage 3, territorial conquest. When the corporation doesn't just influence the government, it becomes the government. The East India Company wasn't a business operating in India. It was the sovereign power in India, run by shareholders for profit. Stage 4 is when the empire stops growing and starts extracting everything it can, until the system collapses. By the 1760s, the East India Company controlled Bengal's economy and restructured everything for maximum profit extraction. Indian farmers were forced to grow cash crops such as indigo, opium, and cotton, not food. The company bought these crops at fixed prices below market value, then sold them in Europe at massive markups. Indian weavers were forced to sell textiles to the company at prices the company dictated. If they tried to sell to anyone else, the company destroyed their looms. This wasn't trade. This was extraction. And in 1770, it led to a catastrophe, the Bengal famine. A drought hit Bengal. Usually, stored grain reserves would prevent mass starvation, but the company forced farmers to plant cash crops rather than food. There were no reserves. And the company didn't stop collecting taxes, even as people starved. Between 1769 and 1773, an estimated 10 million people died, 1/3 of Bengal's population. And the company's response? They increased taxes on survivors to make up for lost revenue. This is what happens when a corporation governs. Profit becomes the only metric. Human life becomes irrelevant. The company wasn't deliberately trying to kill millions, but it structured the economy so that when a crisis hit, millions would die. By the 1780s, the company was sending 2 to 3 million pounds per year to Britain. That's over 300 million pounds in today's money. Every year, extracted from India, paid as dividends to shareholders, while millions starved. This is stage 4, the extraction economy. When the corporation squeezes every penny out of conquered territory, regardless of human cost. Indian cotton funded British factories. Indian taxes funded British wars. Indian resources built the British Empire. And the East India Company shareholders became the wealthiest class in Britain. until it all collapsed. Stage 5 is when extraction becomes unsustainable, when the governed population revolts, and when the government bails out the corporation. In 1857, Indian soldiers in the company's army mutinied, the Sepoy Rebellion. What started as a military mutiny became a mass uprising. Across northern India, people revolted against company rule. Not against Britain, against the company. The rebellion was brutal. Massacres on both sides, cities besieged, populations slaughtered, and the East India Company couldn't suppress it. The company's army was stretched thin. Its finances were in chaos. Its authority was collapsing. So the British government intervened with British Army troops, with emergency funding. After 18 months of war, the rebellion was crushed. But the company was finished. In 1858, the British government officially dissolved the East India Company. It transferred all its territories, armies, and authority to the British Crown. The company's assets were nationalized. Its debts were assumed by the British government. Its shareholders were compensated. This was the first too-big-to-fail bailout in modern history. The British government couldn't let the company collapse because the company controlled India, and India was too valuable to lose. So taxpayers bailed out the shareholders. The people who had profited from company rule for 257 years got paid. The people who had suffered under company rule got nothing. This is Stage 5, the collapse and bailout. When the corporate empire becomes unsustainable and the government steps in, not to punish the corporation, but to rescue it. Because by Stage 5, the corporation and the state are inseparable. The pattern was established in 1858, and it's been repeating ever since. The East India Company's playbook is being used again, just without the armies. Stage 1, the monopoly grant. Amazon doesn't have a royal charter, but it has regulatory capture. Google controls 92% of search, not because it's the best, but because it pays Apple billions to be the default. These aren't earned monopolies. They're protected ones. Stage 2, private power. Amazon has 1.5 million employees, more than the active duty military of most countries. Google has data on 4 billion people, where you go, what you search, who you talk to. BlackRock manages $10 trillion in assets, more than the GDP of every country except the US and China. This isn't a military force, but it's power. Stage 3, infrastructure control. Amazon's AWS hosts 30% of the internet. If Amazon's cloud goes down, hospitals, banks, and governments stop functioning. Google controls information access. If you're not on Google, you don't exist online. BlackRock is buying residential properties across America, pricing individual buyers out of the market. This is economic conquest, not military, but just as absolute. Stage 4, the extraction economy. Amazon pays warehouse workers $15 per hour, while Jeff Bezos is worth over $180 billion. Google sells your data to advertisers. You create the product, they take the profit. BlackRock raises rents, while home ownership rates collapse. This is extraction, the modern version of the company taxing Indian farmers. Stage 5, too big to fail. In 2008, the government bailed out banks. In 2020, the Federal Reserve bought corporate bonds, including Amazon's. These companies are woven into critical infrastructure. If Amazon fails, supply chains collapse. If Google fails, the internet fractures. They are too big to fail, and they know it. The East India Company took 257 years to reach Stage 5. Amazon did it in 30, Google in 25. The pattern hasn't changed, it's just faster. And the endpoint is always the same. A corporation more powerful than governments, extracting wealth until the system breaks, and a bailout paid for by taxpayers while shareholders profit. If you've watched this far, you understand the corporate empire cycle. You see how the East India Company in 1757 and Amazon today follow the same 5 stages. Subscribe to Capital Origins. Because when the next corporation says it's too big to fail, when the next bailout is justified as protecting the economy, you'll want to know which stage you're in and who's profiting from it. Corporate empires always follow the same pattern: monopoly, private power, infrastructure control, extraction, bailout. The only question is whether we'll recognize it in time or bail them out again. Hit subscribe. Because the East India Company happened over 250 years ago. But the warning is for today. And the next corporate empire is already being built. You just need to recognize it before it's too powerful to stop.